everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Wai Tsang is returning for his Philosopher-in-Residence series, The Missing Weltanschauung, Perennial Wisdom for Systems Change. And again, the series is 4 interlinking presentations where Wai will explain what the missing 21st century Weltanschauung or worldview looks like. And the first session, we talked about perennial wisdom returning. Second session was about system change and how to do it. And today's session, the third one, is Wai's symmetry theory of life and intelligence. So how today's going to work, I'm going to take in Wai, he's going to present, and then we'll just do Q&A. And we're here for 90 minutes scheduled, but we might go over 10 minutes. So anytime, drop your questions in the chat, and then I'll call on you. You can ask your question to Wai during that portion. That being said, Wai, welcome back to the Stoa. Excited. This is going to be a heavy one, I think.
It's great to be back. Yeah, I mean, tonight's material is probably the most exciting. I mean, it's all very kind of exciting material, but tonight's material is something else. It's out of this world. I mean, really, I can't. I'm so excited when I talk about these ideas. And the basic idea is this. There are these huge mysteries in science right now. Okay, it's to do with life and intelligence. Okay, what's the nature of life? Functional genomics. How does the genome compute a body? On problem of ontogenesis, and there's a puzzle of how the brain works and mind. What tonight's presentation is going to show is that basically there's a unified theory which unifies life and intelligence using this principle called symmetry. So it's huge, and it's also the key to a radical and better way of doing artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it's going to be quite a heavy talk, but the implications are ginormous for system change, also for artificial intelligence, and also for bringing the perennial wisdom alive for the 21st century. I'll explain at the end of the talk. Okay, now look. Like E equals mc squared, okay, like Einstein's E equals mc squared. Now, Einstein wanted to call his theory first invariance theory or symmetry theory, basically. So what it means is basically that there's a symmetry between matter and energy. Okay, so what we're proposing, okay, is that there basically exists a similar symmetry between life and intelligence. So in the same way, matter and energy transpose into one another. They're really two sides of the same coin. They're really the same underlying thing, the same invariant thing. So for these massive mysteries of life and intelligence, we can show exactly the same thing. Okay. So, okay, so go to tonight's talk's quite diagram heavy in order to squeeze it into 45 minutes or 50 minutes. Okay, so this diagram is a summary of the theory. So basically the idea that basically life as we understand it is basically genes, gene regulatory networks, genomes, and the missing theory of ontogenesis, which is development. A fertilized egg becomes a body or an organism. And of course, it's the theory of evolution, very important theory. And intelligence, as we understand it, is neurons, it's neural networks, it's brains, it's thoughts and behavior, it's learning and creativity. What the theory shows is that across this diagram, there is a perfect symmetry between everything in this diagram to add up to this idea of a perfect symmetry between life and intelligence. Okay, that's the basic idea. Now, okay, so we'll start from the bottom. Okay, the top is basically, okay, evolution is like learning and creativity. The idea that evolution is happening in the brain and mind, that's quite an established idea, isn't it? Like MEMS, neural Darwinism, genetic programming, genetic algorithms, etc. But we'll start from the beginning. Okay, so at first, how can a gene possibly be like a neuron? Well, it's based on the fact that there's been 2 massive fallacies about genes and neurons, which have been dispelled literally in the past few decades. Okay, I'll tell you what they are, and it leads to a radically different way of looking at genes and neurons that shows that they're essentially what they're doing in information processing terms is identical. Okay, the first fallacy is junk DNA. Okay, the idea that the non-coding regions is junk. It's not junk. It's where all the actions going on in terms of specifying bodies. Not specifying the exact protein, the amino acids, but in terms of specifying organismal form. Okay, they basically regulate the controlling and expression of genes. Now, the other massive fallacy is to do with neurons. It's this idea that the dendrite is there to shuttle information from synapses into the cell body. Now, this is a diagram you've seen in 1,000 neuroscience books about neuroscience and books about kind of theoretical neuroscience and neural networks and artificial intelligence. it is this basic idea that so these nodes here are basically synapses, and basically the dendrite exists to shuttle the information to the cell body. Well, that's completely mistaken. So completely mistaken. What the new research from the past 10 years shows is that basically most of the processing is going on in the actual dendrite. Okay, so basically we'll start at first with this idea of a dendrite working as the regulatory mechanisms on genes. Okay, so going back to this diagram here, I mean, starting from the bottom, gene equals a neuron. We'll start from here. Now, basically, what it is, it's these non-coding regions, or so-called junk DNA. What's going on is basically they have these things called cis regulatory modules, and they're like little patches of DNA. So, look, this strand here is like a little strand of DNA, and here we have a cis regulatory module. Okay. And this one binds 4 transcription factors. Okay, so it'll bind, it's usually kind of 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes 1. And basically what happens is basically the transcription factors will then regulate the activation of the gene. Now here you see a gene, that's the coding region. You see this diagram here, the coding region is basically what encodes the specific amino acids that make up the proteins and metabolic enzymes. Now, okay, a gene firing is essentially the RNA polymerase kind of sliding down a gene, and RNA comes out. That's like the gene firing. Okay. Now see here on this gene here, this diagram, this schematic, there's 4 cis regulatory modules, and it means basically each loop is like an OR case. Each of these cis regulatory modules, that one or that one or that one, can activate the gene if the right transcription factors bind onto the cis regulatory module. You see, so what it's doing is acting like a Boolean combinatorial process. It's essentially doing combinatorial logic. Now, the latest research with neurons is showing exactly the same thing. Basically, new research is showing that a tiny sliver of dendrite on a neuron. Okay, a neuron. Let's go back to the diagram and show you a kind of a standard neuron, workhorse neuron of the brain cortical pyramidal cell. Now, top to bottom is about 1 millimeter. Okay. Now these dendritic patches, okay, they work like they find that basically dendritic patches about 25 micrometers across. So where I'm shaking my cursor, a tiny sliver of dendrite has more computing power than an artificial neural network involving about a dozen neurons in a layer. So a tiny sliver of dendrite on a real neuron has more computing power than even a dozen artificial neurons. Now, how is that? It's because basically these patches involving several kind of mini synapses, maybe kind of like a dozen to 2 dozen, but not many. They are doing exactly the same thing as the genes. They're doing Boolean operations like and, or, not, X or exclude, etc., like conjunction and disjunction. And they can also do things like temporal order processing. So you see a tiny sliver of dendrite is doing something really complex that's more akin to combinatorial logic circuits than simple summation. And it's not doing simple, I take the signal from the synapse into the cell body and simple summation and then some activation function, which is a kind of fiction about neurons that came out about 70 years ago. But this fiction underlies basically the contemporary neural networks, artificial intelligence. Now, this new model of a neuron is going to revolutionize neuroscience, theoretical neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. Okay, so let's go back to now, if we go back to the diagram, okay, so basically what is this? So a gene is as a neuron. So basically the cis regulatory modules, they do like they do Boolean operations in the same way these patches of dendrite do all these Boolean operations, and XOR or not, etc. And essentially doing combinatorial logic. Now, in the same way that neurons also do summation, you know, the signal adds. Genes, these cis regulatory modules also do summation. They add a number of transcription factors and they do a kind of simple summation on the cis regulatory module. So you see this kind of correspondence between the 2 genes and neurons. Now, in the same way, okay, this is a new discovery from about 6-7 years ago. In the same way, each of these branches of these what's called a loopome of a gene, what's been discovered is basically each of the major dendritic branches feeding into the cell body of a neuron is actually an OR case. So it's basically this major dendrite, or that one, or that one, or that one, independently can activate the entire neuron. You see? So in the same way, each loopome is like an OR case feeding into the gene expression, RNA polymerase to fire the gene. Each major dendritic branch going into the cell body is also an OR case. You see, it's like disjunction. So again, another correspondence between genes and neurons. It gets deeper. It gets much deeper in this. Okay, so in the same way, okay, so dendritic branches and basically cis regulatory modules are doing Boolean OR across the dendrites and also across these loopomes, these loops. Now, point 3 is that okay, we've done the dendrite part. Okay. So the analogy is quite simple. The analogy is basically this idea that you have these genes which are like neurons. They signal to other genes. Basically, they don't output kind of proteins or metabolic enzymes. What they do is they basically transcribe a transcription factor that becomes a protein. That's a signaling molecule that then transmits to another gene, a gene regulatory mechanism. Okay, what it means is this. Okay, what it means in the same way neurons, okay, have a cell body and they have an axon that sends a signal out. Okay, now the analogy is this: you have a landline, a point-to-point connection between 2 points, okay, A and B. Okay, and you have a mobile phone. Now the landline is a physical wire, but a mobile phone is a transmission medium. You're sending out waves into the ether. Okay, now in the same way as a mobile phone, these proteins which make transcription factors, they will basically kind of multitude, thousands, millions of these kind of transcription factor proteins be transmitted out into the kind of like in the nucleus of a cell. And then because the transcription factors will bind to specific transcription factor binding sites, they're about, in a human genome, about 1,400. Okay, it means you have from this a gene manufacturing the transcription factor, you have a point-to-point connection, exactly like an axon going point to point from neuron to neuron. Do you see? And in the same way that these connections in neurons can be excitatory or inhibitory, in the genome, these connections can also likewise be excitatory or inhibitory. Now, of course, genes are changed through evolution, but as we show later, there's a symmetry relationship between learning and evolution. So we show how exactly the same principles happening with neurons in the life of a single organism. We can go on. I mean, genes probabilistic like neurons. The way they activate is probabilistic. But we can really, this list diagram can go on to about 20, 50 points. Okay, it's a very deep analogy between how neurons work and how genes work now. Okay, so it's this idea of symmetry, this idea basically that things are the same. So even though things look different, they are the same. So, let's explore symmetries a bit more. We kind of lay some foundations to explore symmetry. Okay, that a neuron is like a gene. Okay. Oh, Joe Bennett, you look like Demis Hassabis. I thought you were Demis Hassabis for a minute there. I thought Demis Hassabis, some DeepMind had logged on. Okay, sorry, you're a small cameo. Anyway, a bit of a digression. Look, symmetry, this is what you learned in high school. Okay, so basically you have a square, and then you do certain transformations, and then these transformations will leave the square looking the same. So you rotate the square 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, etc. It looks like the same square. Okay, and again, what you learn in high school, you take the square, you reflect it in certain axes. It looks exactly the same. Now, the basic idea behind symmetry is this idea of transformation and invariance. Something transformed, something changes, something changes, something immune to change, something invariant. So the same idea. We have on the top this kind of like shape changes color. Sorry, the shape changes shape, but the color stays the same. So the invariant aspect is basically the color. Here, basically you have a square, the color changes. The invariant aspect is the square. And here you have the basic shape. You transform it, but it's the same basic shape, isn't it? It's, what's invariant is basically the length of the lines and the relationships between the angles of the lines. But you see, these transformations leave that shape basically the same. So basically, it means that this idea of symmetry applies across this entire diagram. So again, a little bit of background to now flesh out our theory. Okay, so we laid basically the foundations and explaining how a gene is like a neuron. We're going to go a bit further to flesh out the theory. I mean, obviously, this is a very short, condensed talk, but you get a gist. I mean, this idea of invariance, basically, that a gene looks nothing like a neuron, but you see, when we abstract away the kind of like details and go right to the essence of what's doing in a kind of information processing terms, there's a kind of, again, invariance between the two, a kind of like a sameness, in other words. We can go on to basically decompose the entire brain, the entire genome. Obviously, we don't have time to do that because it's a very brief talk. But we can say the basic principles of brain organization is hierarchical, recursively nested structure. So, okay, hierarchies. So kind of bottom of the hierarchy, you might have the motor cortex, and you have like, secondary motor cortex, tertiary motor cortex, etc. A kind of hierarchy. We also have recursively nested structures. So you have basically neurons in microcolumns, in columns, in macrocolumns, and hypercolumns, kind of recursively nested structure. So with genes, the bottom of the hierarchy might be the genes. Okay, the output zone is basically the genes that make structural and metabolic enzymes. That's the output, like the motor cortex outputs, your movements of your arms and legs. Okay, and in the same way as the brain, genes are recursively nested. So you have exons in genes in gene batteries, gene clustered in batteries of batteries and batteries of batteries, etc. You see. So the same principles of organization in the brain, you also find in neuronal networks, you also find in gene regulatory networks and in the entire genome. Okay, so the you get a gist. Once you see a neuron as a gene, then you see brains are made up of neurons linked up. You can see how the genome is made up of these genes and their gene regulatory mechanisms all linked up into a genome that works like a little fractal brain. Okay. Now, the next thing is going to involve a skimming stone over vast swathes of information. And okay, so basically in this diagram, we've basically done the bottom three parts, haven't we? Skimming stoned over gene is a neuron, an idea of how a gene regulatory network is like a neuronal network and how a genome can be like a brain. Now, the next part, okay, this is not so obvious because the idea that ontogenesis, the process by which a fertilized egg becomes a body, and this thing called thought and behavior, how are they symmetrical with one another? Okay, this takes some explaining because it takes some abstracting. There's an abstract symmetry. There's an abstract kind of basically, again, the explanation earlier serves us well here. There's basically an invariant aspect that spans all ontogenesis and all thought and behavior into a single symmetry, and not explain what it is. Okay, and it's it really is a kind of, at least a language which allows us to encode all ontogenesis, all thought and behavior, and that's the language of binary trees. Okay, so that's a tree like you'd see in real life. Okay, and this is a binary tree. We think it's absolutely universal. We think binary trees are fundamental to the universe. We think binary trees are really, really important, and we think binary trees and the language associated with it completely explains everything to do with ontogenesis and everything to do with thought and behavior. Let me explain this. Okay, let me explain. Okay, so obviously the idea that basically your entire life and all your intelligence is basically one binary tree sounds outlandish, doesn't it? Until it's shown that it's obvious. Basically, let me explain this. Look. Your entire life and all your behavior, all your intelligence is based on binary trees, and it's a single binary tree. Let me explain. Okay, mitosis. Okay, what a fertilized egg becomes all the cells in your body, 15 trillion or whatever. And this through mitosis is a binary process, always doubling, always dividing to two. And then obviously that gives rise to all the cells in your body, including neurons. Now, neurons, the axons, the arborizations, the trees are actually always binary branching. So you see, even on a quite a kind of like a simple level, basically the basis of your thought and behavior and your body is a single emanation, it's a single binary tree. But it goes on, it's everything else. I mean, absolutely everything else is a binary tree. Let me explain this. This is absolutely wild, but let me explain. Integrating vast swathes of the latest cutting edge research from the past few decades and past few years. Okay, so we've done ontogenesis. Now, okay, that's what we explained earlier. Now, progenitor field formation is basically the idea of millions of cells or billions of cells dividing into two. Okay, now this is important because it's always binary branching. There's a specific logic to it. There's a specific genetic machinery which does it. But the main thing is always binary branching. And there's this idea that the entire progenitor field, which gives rise to your body, obviously this is a schematic, is led to the distinguished developmental biologist Brian Goodwin saying that all ontogenesis is a bifurcation diagram. So this is a bifurcation diagram of a binary branching binary tree. And he's saying underlying your body is a bifurcation diagram. Now, another distinguished top name in developmental biology and math and theoretical biology is James D. Murray. He wrote a telephone directory of two books. It's one of those books you read and you just stunned that it's written by a single person. It's like two telephone directories. I mean, one guy wrote this. Anyway, he's a huge name, and his work is really part of what PhD people learn when they learn about mathematical biology and theoretical ontogenesis and stuff. And he specifically says even in computer simulations, it's very hard to get a trifurcation going. So trifurcations are very unstable, but there's a specific machinery to do bifurcations that's actually very, very reliable. So when you're doing like specific biological form, bifurcations are really the way to go. Okay, so that's progenies of fields. Okay, so now, okay, we move on to explaining, okay, this is the Nobel Prize winning work of how in a Drosophila fruit fly, how the long axis is specified in the development of a fruit fly. Okay, there's loads of fruit flies in my kitchen right now. It's like so this is kind of this is how they breed. Okay, this is how they develop. Okay, so you got this the long axis of a Drosophila fruit fly. Basically, as it develops, okay, over time, you see this kind of arrow going down. It means time. It means that the genome lays down these chemical markers over time as it develops, and it's basically a binary doubling pattern. And if you draw a binary tree right through it, it means that the chemical codes it's laying down specifies in combinatorial form exact locations along the long axis of the Drosophila fruit fly. But many think it's a binary tree again, binary trees again. Okay, and the algorithm which gives rise to your arms and legs and fingers, again, it's a binary algorithm. Do you see on the top here, you have a condensation, which is essentially a progenitor field that's going to be laid in with bone and bone matter, basically, and cartilage. Anyway, you have two steps. You have two basic moves in the algorithm. You can binary branch it like that, which is a binary operation, or you can break a bit off, which is basically one piece that's become two pieces. So there's a binary operation. And you recursively apply those steps, and you create basically arms, the classic pattern in vertebrates. One in your arms, one bone, two bone, lots of bones, fingers, and that's a basic pattern that's replicated from fish right to yourself, all mammals, and etc. So that basic design is basically a human arm and hand, the cat paw, bat wing, whale flipper. It's the same basic design, but it's a binary algorithm. Okay, now we move to psychology now. We move to psychology. Now imagine basically this thing called hemi-neglect. You lose half your world. So if you lose a part of your brain called the right parietal cortex, you basically lose half your world. You literally lose, so, you kind of like, sometimes we understand how things work when they go wrong. This is a case in point, because it means basically the patient basically can only draw half a house, half a clock, half a word, can only recall half a street. Asked to eat a plate of food, as we go through numbers, he starts eating the plate of food, stops eating, you turn the plate of food around, and then basically then stops eating again. He basically lost half his world. Do you see? And basically, it shows a kind of binary divisioning process to how the normal brain is basically representing things. Okay, now that is like a hemi-neglect, and basically the overall kind of view of your world, where you point to, where you walk. Now if I hold my head still, okay, and if I look at a picture, when you look at things, there's what's called microsaccade. Your eye moves around very quickly to scan a picture. Now, there's a kind of related condition to hemi-neglect, where basically, now this is to do with basically the eye scanning pattern. Now look, this is a normal person. He can scan everywhere. And this is what we saw just now, basically losing half your world. Now modern research has shown there's certain lesions in certain part of the brain where this is different. Look, you've basically lost half of the half. You see the red dots on one half. Basically, if you divide the visual field in two, it's only scanning on one half of each half. Now, if you look at this diagram on a fine scale, basically, is now scanning one half of each quarter. You see, it's kind of even with the eye scanning has lost half the world in recursively, kind of in a recursive way. Now, okay, if we just hold the eyeball still, then basically your retina and your basically visual processing processes visual input in terms of spatial frequency. Now this curve represents a sine wave, but underneath the curve, you can see this is a spatial frequency grating. And there's a paradigm in psychology called just noticeable difference. And basically what they did was basically they show these gratings, to a person, and they detected the just noticeable difference. Now, what they found, cut long story short, they found basically over time, you keep presenting the grating. It's like the brain tires out, and basically the just noticeable difference gets more and more. So you have to keep increasing the contrast. But what they found is if you increase the grating 1 octave above or 1 octave down, then there's no effect. It means that basically even your retina and your visual cortex is basically doing it in the octave subband, i.e. doubling and halving the frequency. Now, Nobel Prize winning work from 2014 of grid cells. Okay, so as you walk around the world, in humans as well, this was done in rats originally, you basically project onto the floor a bunch of equilateral triangles. And as you walk around the room, when you pass in the middle of each equilateral triangle, okay, you basically, neurons in the, what's called the medial entorhinal cortex, they basically start firing maximally, okay. And as you move away from the vertex of the equilateral triangles, it gets less and less. Now, the main thing is these equilateral triangle grids come in certain sizes, and the scaling size of each kind of scale is 1.42, which is the square root roughly of 2, which means you times 1.42 again, you double or you halve. Again, it's kind of incredible, isn't it? Doubling pattern with respect to spatial frequency processing in your retina and primary visual cortex, and also with grid cells. Okay, I mean, it's, and also with brain waves. Okay, so here we have a kind of like octaving brain waves, doubling and halving in frequency. Now, if we draw a kind of like link up the middle of the kind of these periods of each wave, and then we subdivide it. They're basically wavelets, and each are kind of like a full cycle of each wavelet. If we draw a kind of like through each node of each center of each wavelet, then we basically get a binary tree. Okay. Now the incredible thing is basically brain waves, again, have this doubling pattern. Gamma waves, roughly 40 hertz, beta waves, roughly 20 hertz, alpha waves, roughly 10 hertz, theta waves, roughly 5 hertz. Now, okay, this is not to be confused with EEG, because most stuff on brainwaves is EEG surface electrodes. Now the signal's all over the place, the spectral spread. So basically, when you look at like EEG brainwaves, it's basically it's really imprecise, and the spectrum is really spread out. But when we actually look at the actual neurons, the physiology of neurons, it's very, very precise. So with respect to gamma waves, basically this is produced from the refractory period of what's called a gamma aminobutyric A inhibitory receptor, which has a refractory period of about 25 milliseconds. It takes 25 milliseconds to recover, and then it works again. So it gives us a very kind of regular kind of 40 hertz wave. And theta waves, it has a very precise a kind of phase and also periodicity, and something called theta phase precession is used in the hippocampus to register where an animal, human beings as well, experiments done in rats, where exactly the rat is in relation to a particular reference point, an object or something near the rat, which means that the actual the firing of the neuron with respect to the phase of the theta wave actually encodes exact location. So see, we have these very precise brainwaves in the brain, and basically they appear in powers of 2 again. Now, research done with speech processing, again, there's a practical application of this idea that what was suspected for a long time has been proven, that gamma waves are indeed used for phoneme processing and dividing up phonemes, basically, and then theta waves are used for syllable processing. So basically, the speech hierarchy, right down to the gamma wave level, beta waves modulating the gamma waves from the theta waves, and delta for prosody. Again, powers of 2. But when we go examine language itself, again, we have this binary doubling structure. When we look at actually how sentences are formed, and people like Chomsky say that there is something very important to do with binary trees. It's something to do with the minimalist program, which we'll talk more about later on, because it's really important. That there's something about binary trees and language which is really, really deep and important. Okay, so just to finish off this skimming stone of vast waves of neuroscience and life science knowledge, music. There's something about catchy music. Okay, basically, so I'll just screen share. I'll just screen share okay, what we'll talk about is basically, you know, these doubling brainwaves for processing gamma, beta, and theta, etc., for prosody, and then using that to relate that to the high level of language. Now, what does language often get inserted into is music. So again, kind of music that's really catchy and music that's really popular, which means classical music, pop music, rock music, folk music, limericks, nursery rhymes. There's a certain pattern, there's a certain doubling pattern to the number of beats in a bar. There's what's called common time, 4/4 common time. And it's a kind of doubling pattern, which makes these, which I believe basically reflects how the brain works. And this is why these kinds of music are popular, because they're easy to process. Because of this doubling pattern, it relates to how the brain also operates using this doubling pattern throughout the things we talked about. Okay, so that's quite a kind of vast swathe of things to do with the brain and ontogenesis, but the repeating pattern is this binary structure. It's absolutely universal. It's an invariant aspect. It's a single symmetry that allows us to capture all these different aspects of ontogenesis and thought behavior into a single underlying symmetry and a single language of binary trees. Now we go back to where we started, the established idea of evolution somehow happening in the brain as learning and creativity. Now, the kind of neuroscientist David Eagleman, okay, he wrote a book with Anthony Brandt, a concert pianist, all about creativity called The Runaway Brain. And he kind of distilled all human creativity into what he thinks is 3 transformations. And so basically human creativity, he says, this is not a new idea. It's very old, but it's basically, I think it's in the right ballpark, basically. What he says with Anthony Brandt, David Eagleman, is that basically all human creativity involves 3 transformations: break, blend, and bend. Okay. So human transformations of human creativity, you take ideas, you break them apart, you recombine them. But then in genes, basically genes also break apart. You have gene insertions and deletions, so you can break genes apart and recombine genes as well. Now, in terms of blending, obviously, like crossing over, one of the main powerful mechanism for creating variation. Mother and father gets together, and basically the kid is a blend of genes again. So in terms of bend, is what we saw earlier. The same pattern is bended and stretched to make a cat paw, a bat wing, a whale flipper. So that's an example, obviously, of bending. You're bending and stretching. So all the kind of transformations of human creativity apply to the biological realm, but vice versa. We take all the transformations, the really major ones of biology, and they also translate to the realm of human creativity. Like, for instance, point mutation. Okay, so you play a song and you play a note wrong. Oh, the song sounds better. It's been mutated. It's actually a better song now. Okay. Or you have a nursery rhyme, or you have a poem, or change a word there. Oh, it's a much better song. Okay, much better poem. Okay, so that's one example of point mutation happening in human creativity. Okay, that's a simple example. Now there's a really powerful mechanism of evolution called retrotransposition. Okay, let me explain this, because biologists believe that most evolution that's happened in primates is basically retrotransposition. And over half the human genome is retrotransposed elements. Let me explain. So retrotransposition is basically, now transposons are basically genes that can actually transpose themselves, then cut themselves out of the genome, and then they move around. They're jumping genes, okay? They actually physically move themselves to another part of the genome. Now retrotransposons, if transposons is like cut and paste, I cut myself out to move myself away. Retrotransposons is like copy and paste. I can copy myself and paste myself anywhere. I can do it repeatedly. Okay, so that's retrotransposition. Now, human creativity, okay, a lot of it has become copy and paste, literally copy and paste. You basically take bits from here, a bit of poetry there, a bit of sample from there, you paste it into your own work. Okay, so another mechanism of really important is called whole genome duplication. You do duplicate the entire genome, then you alter that, you change it basically. It's like a disciple learning from a master and then going on to mutate what you've learned from the master. You basically duplicated the skills and then you mutate. Like the Beatles became great because they're literally playing covers for years and years in the Hamburg nightclubs, and then they wrote their own songs. Or like the idea that lesser artists borrow, great artists steal, and then they kind of mutate those ideas. So the main point is that all these biological transformations apply to the human domain, and vice versa. All these human creativity transformations apply to the biological domain. It means there is a perfect symmetry relationship between evolution and also the transforms of evolution, also the transforms of human creativity. And when we couple the idea, okay, at the top of the diagram, evolution, all the transforms translate into human creativity, with the notion that they're working on the same abstract language and structure and invariant aspect of binary trees that spans thought and behavior, and that this abstract language then has a substrate in terms of genomes and brains and genes and neurons, which have essentially also a symmetry relationship. It means across the entire diagram, there's a symmetry relationship between everything, which means there's a symmetry relationship between life and intelligence. Okay, now this goes far, far deeper, because I'll show you something astounding. Okay, this goes far, far deeper. It is this. Okay, so basically the two sides of the diagram, I can basically stack them together, because a genome basically computes a body, but also computes a brain, but then the brain computes thought and behavior. It means that basically, it as if there's a symmetry relationship between genome and brain, it means a genome works as a tiny fractal brain to compute a body and brain, and that brain goes on to work like a giant genome. Okay, I'll tell you something obvious. Now, basically, everything in your life has emanated from a fertilized egg, hasn't it? Everything has emanated from a fertilized egg. There's a chain of causality from everything that's ever happened in your life from that point of fertilization. So there's a single chain, there's a single, like a chain of causality to everything. Now, what I'll show you next is basically that there is a single process underlying everything that's happened that can be captured with a single algorithm and a single calculus. And that sounds astounding, that basically there's a single emanation, but it's actually a single process. Let me explain what that process is. That process is, it's differentiate, select, amplify. Now, people who do complexity studies, basically people like in the Santa Fe Institute, when they think about evolution, they think of it in terms of differentiate, select, amplify, but we think as a general algorithm that applies to everything from this emanation from fertilized egg. Okay, so evolution, this is obvious. Okay, you differentiate, you create different species, you create variation between those species. That's differentiation. And then you select, obviously that's natural selection. Then you amplify certain species and certain individuals within the species to be amplified. They breed, they basically transmit their genes. So that's differentiate, select, amplify in evolution. But also ontogenesis is also differentiate, select, amplify, because certain progenitor fields are actually programmed to die. Certain progenitor fields are programmed to literally be amplified, get more blood vessels, get more nutrients, and become big and strong, basically. So ontogenesis is also a process of differentiate, select, amplify. Now, axons and dendrites and synapses, okay, the modern understanding is basically coming around to the idea that basically neurons, basically they constantly restructure themselves. They're not static things. And this new understanding is saying that this restructuring of neurons and axons that goes on in everybody, basically, in your brain, is basically critical to how neurons work. Now, what is a neuron doing when it's basically doing this? It means that basically the axons are basically literally differentiating into space, exploring into space. And for a particular criteria, they're being selected. That criteria is called spike time dependent plasticity. If they obey that criteria, they're literally amplified. It's called long-term potentiated. The synapses are strengthened. So basically how neurons are working, exploring, differentiating into space, being selected and being amplified. Okay, so again, we're going to try and cut through vast swathes of knowledge with a very simple idea. So we come to thought and behavior. Okay, so we're going to cover all thought behavior with a very simple symmetry. Okay, and that symmetry involves basically a very important circuit in your brain that's very ancient. It's actually found in lampreys. It's a very fundamental circuit. It's called a Strata Circuit, and it's basically the circuit to do reinforcement learning, basically. Now, okay, when I started learning neuroscience about 30 years ago, this stratal circuit mainly applied to basically basic behavior, like moving your arms and legs about, your motor cortex and premotor cortex. The modern understanding basically has it that the stratal circuit is involved practically everything to do with the frontal lobes, thought and behavior, all movements, but also control of emotions. So this stratal circuit is really fundamental. And the parts of your brain, like the visual cortex, which isn't directly connected to the stratum, critically involves areas that are connected to the stratal circuit. To cut a long story short, it means there is a fundamental circuit to do reinforcement learning that basically underlies all thought, all behavior, or all emotional control. Now, if you think about reinforcement learning, it is essentially what is understood in artificial intelligence and most theorists. It's again a process of differentiating, selecting, and amplifying. There's all the things you can do, the things that don't get amplified, those mistakes and those big things that don't bring any reward, but certain kind of behaviors are selected for because they are rewarded and they're literally amplified by dopamine. It just means, again, behavior with this symmetry of this stratal circuit, all behavior, all thought, all emotional regulation is differentiate, select, amplify. Once we create all those behaviors, those thoughts, then we go back to square one. The idea that that evolution happening in the brain, it means that basically, you know, the process continues to being differentiate, select, amplify over those created structures in your mind. Okay, so now we move on to okay, we're going to skimming stone over this and try and get this talk within an hour now. Okay, so we're overrunning slightly. Okay, now look, we're going to basically go to the idea of a single calculus and a single mathematical language. So we're really going to make this theory into something really formal, and actually it's going to arrive at a very deep truth. So basically, I need to explain some background to show you the implications of what I'm saying. Johann Kepler basically had to figure out the orbits of the planets. Tycho Brahe had the dots. Johann Kepler joined the dots with elliptical orbits. That's a great big innovation. René Descartes came up with analytical geometry, so now you can describe those elliptical orbits using mathematics. And then Newton and Leibniz came up with differential calculus. Now you can show how those orbits evolve in space and time, basically, how, you know, the dynamic aspect. So that's how science has generally been done, using this continuous mathematics for the past 200-300 years. Okay, so basically an outline of mathematics and science. But the thing about this continuous mathematics, it doesn't really do recursively nested structure. It doesn't really do the kind of things we've been talking about, binary trees, or the discontinuous. Obviously, you know, basically it's non-differentiable. So differentiable mathematics, which forms a bedrock of most science, doesn't really apply to what we're interested in, which is the stuff of mind and genomics. Okay, so there's another kind of mathematics which is even deeper. Now, one of the towering achievements of the 20th century, okay, along with Einstein's relativity and the formation of quantum mechanics, is basically Principia Mathematica. Now these geniuses, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, what they did in a nutshell, they reduced all mathematics, I mean all of it, all mathematics, into set theory, which is a branch of what's called discrete mathematics, including things like Boolean algebra and logic, and also what's called formal axiomatic systems. Okay, now look, there is a very important question in linguistics called universal grammar. And now some people debate the existence of universal grammar. We think it's absolutely obvious that there must be something like universal grammar going on in the brain. So we think Chomsky is right. Chomsky also has this what's called a minimalist program, and also in linguistics, in some universities, explore this most minimal distillation of universal grammar. We know what universal grammar is. We don't have this minimalist answer yet. Okay, so and then Gregory Chaitin, who's a very distinguished and very smart guy, very smart discrete mathematician, logician. He has this idea in his book Metamaths called dynamic formal axiomatic system. Okay, so basically, formal axiomatic systems is the ultimate abstraction and distillation of all mathematics. And basically, he's saying that there must be a dynamic formal axiomatic system, or speculating might be, that can actually generate all mathematics. Okay, which leads to the question of a most minimal formal axiomatic system. What I propose is that what Chomsky is talking about and what Chaitin's talking about is the same thing. Now, obviously, there's no sharp demarcation between human language and mathematical language, is there? There can't be, for the simple reason that you can say in human language, in words, any mathematical construct. You can basically describe it. But when you kind of distill it down to the most simple, I'm saying it converges to the same point. And what I also will show now is basically that same point, the most minimal universal grammar and most minimal dynamic formal axiomatic system is also the most minimal distillation of this unified life intelligence theory. Okay, so we're going to go to the next point. This is quite deep. Okay, this is so how the hell do I do that? Okay, well look. Basically, we go to our binary trees. Okay, so, sorry, I missed this diagram. Noam Chomsky basically talks about this thing called the miracle creed, and Albert Einstein also talks about it. Basically, it's this idea that the most simple solution is the truth. And in science, that Albert Einstein said, nature is the realization of the simplest, that is mathematically conceivable. And Noam Chomsky says that basically, if you don't have the simplest solution, you figure you're wrong. That's the way it is. That's how nature is. We think they are absolutely right. We think basically it doesn't just apply to physics and linguistics. It also applies to life science and brain science. We think that there's a most minimal solution, and we think that's where the answer lies. Okay, so this is how we do it. This takes some explaining. Okay, so basically, look. So I've done a list diagram so we don't miss any steps basically. Now, basically, point one, okay, all discrete mathematics can be encoded using binary trees and by the same token formal axiomatic systems. So it's essentially all the relations of set theory and Boolean algebra, they're binary. All those kind of nested parentheses of logic and Boolean algebra, essentially binary trees expressed in linear format. You see, so binary trees are really the kind of code that can really encode all discrete mathematics and all formal axiomatic systems. Now, binary trees can also represent space and time. Let me explain. Look, so basically, you see, that's a binary tree, that's a binary tree. Now, basically, you see, that's also a binary tree, but see what I've done? I've made it express a little 2D grid. And I can recursively expand that binary tree to make a kind of 2D grid of arbitrary infinite complexity. So that's space, okay, 2D space in which you can project higher dimensional spaces. Now, okay, so time, I've basically linked those 2D spaces in a chain. So that's very easy to understand, isn't it? It's basically binary trees can represent space and time. Now, okay, so it's basically, now formal axiomatic systems, okay, can cover vast swathes of knowledge in very kind of layman and pictographic way. Formal axiomatic systems are a general class of system called string substitution systems, and they all involve little arrows. Okay, make the explanation very easy and intuitive. And these little arrows involve things like lambda calculus, in things like the kind of linguistics production systems and logic inference systems, basically. They involve a little arrow mapping from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Now, one class of string substitution system, which really illustrates how formal axiomatic systems work, is what's called Lindemar Systems. And it really shows, okay, for one, they're literally used to generate trees. Okay, so these trees don't exist, they're generated mathematically. So there's another example of Lindemar system generated trees. Okay, they don't exist. They're generated using a string substitution system. Now, this is the actual Lindemar system for basically, this is the very first one, okay? And you see on the left-hand side, you have basically variables and constants. So you have basically the rules of construction. You see the little arrow there, the little arrow there. What you're having is something mapping from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, okay? And basically recursively find those rules, you can create tree structures. Now, this is the Lindemar system for literally a binary tree. So again, you have these initial variables, and you have these rules. Again, see the little arrow, see the little arrow. This is an example of a string substitution system, which applies also to Lindemar systems, not just Lindemar systems, also formal axiomatic systems in general, and also lambda calculus. Okay, now, okay, look, okay, basically what we saw earlier is also can be represented in the same way, the growth of arms and legs and fingers. Okay, so the idea that basically formal axiomatic systems have this little arrow that's really important. Now, okay, look, this is something interesting. Now, look. Basically, we're encoding all formal axiomatic systems in terms of binary trees, and we can use binary trees to represent space and time. But look, what's the simplest way to represent the binary tree? Because we're trying to basically find the simplest solution, because according to Chomsky and Einstein, that's where the answer lies. Okay, you might think that the simplest way to represent a binary tree is with a binary branch. Okay, that's what Chomsky thinks, pair merge or set merge. There's an even simpler way to represent a binary tree. Let me show you. Okay, look, here is a binary tree. And basically what you can do, you from the top node, you can do a little tree walk, and each tree walk is like a little jump to the next node. And each jump is like a little arrow going from node to node. Okay, so I'm basically a tree walk all around the binary tree. Okay, so I'm going all around the binary tree, and I'll basically go back to the start. Now I take away the binary tree, I've got the pattern of the tree walk encodes the binary tree. Okay, so with the tree walk, the little arrows can encode binary trees. Then when we couple our little arrows that can express binary trees of arbitrary infinite complexity that can represent all discrete mathematics, formal axiomatic systems, etc. And basically couple those arrows with the arrows of discrete mathematics and formal axiomatic systems, the arrows of generation, the Lindemar systems, then there's a very easy proposition that we're dealing with the same kind of arrow. So what we want is a unified kind of arrow. Okay, so going back to this diagram here, a single unifying arrow that allows us to join basically all the binary tree structures representing space, time, and all the constructs and all the symbols of formal axiomatic systems. So the arrow going from left-hand side to the right-hand side, doing the generative aspect, is a single arrow. Now, okay, that sounds, some people may be rolling their eyes, but there's a very important branch of mathematics now getting a lot of attention called category theory. And category theory is a leading contender for grand unifying theory of all mathematics. It's really quite simple and elegant. Now, what does category consist of? It consists of little arrows joined end to end. Okay, so there's a kind of great unifying of ideas. Now there's one step which is missing. Okay, and basically because we think we can make things even simpler. Okay, now if formal axiomatic systems consist of 4 things, those 4 things are basically 4 aspects of formal axiomatic systems: is an alphabet, a grammar, a set of axioms. This is basically your okay. Point 4 is basically your set of inference rules, is your arrows that generates all these formulas. Okay, now if these are the 4 aspects of formal axiomatic systems, if you can combine all those 4 aspects into one thing, surely that's most simple, isn't it? If there's these 4 different aspects are one thing, that's the simplest distillation. But how the hell do you do that? How you do it is basically you need a new class of structure whereby basically it's recursively self-modifying. If it's one thing, basically it has to generate everything from itself. There's no alphabet and rules of construction and generation. Basically, if it's one thing, basically it has to generate itself from itself. And that's the most minimal kind of solution to what we're talking about. Okay, so it's basically you must have something which can be process and also structure, can encode structure and process, and that the process must augment the structure, and that augmented structure in turn augments the process in a kind of feedback loop of recursive self-modification. Okay, that sounds so abstract and outlandish until I relate it to physical facts. Okay, so okay, like this is a normal function. Okay, so this is like again little arrows, a domain to a range. Let's say represent functions. You have a domain and a range, but because it's recursively self-modifying, this is a head twister. But you basically the domain and range have become one thing. Okay, now how does that work? That's so abstract. Basically, you've got one thing that modifies itself to create more complex versions of itself that are basically operand and operator, and then have this unique ability to basically modify itself recursively and then augment the way it can modify itself in the future. Okay, that sounds really abstract until you realize that everything in the diagram I showed you earlier to do with ontogenesis, life, creativity, neurons, etc., everything in this diagram is a structure, but it's also a process. Now let me explain this. Let me explain. Like on Bond diagram, these are all structures, but they are involved in the creation of a process. They're involved in the process that creates the structures of thought and behavior. But in turn, those thoughts and behavior, the structures lead to another process. Okay, and the process of evolution creates a structure called a tree of evolution. And then obviously developmental processes create a body, and thought and behavior then feed into, there's a purpose to your thought and behavior, leads into another process. Your entire life unfolding from a fertilized egg to basically this prime directive of fertilizing eggs. So your entire unfolding process leads to this kind of your entire life being a node on a family tree. I know it's a funny way to look at things. Basically, you are a node on family tree. Your entire process of your life creates a structure, temporal spatial structure in space and time. And then basically that in turn feeds into the process of creating family trees. Do you get it? You can take it on a cosmic scale, that basically the unfolding of the entire universe and the structure of the entire universe from beginning to end. If we go back to the first talk of a cyclical universe, the entire structure then feeds to the process of then initiating the next cosmic cycle. I'm saying there's something very, very general and very universal about this concept of basically objects being structure and process. So even though it sounds really abstract at first, you realize it's universal. And also to make things concrete again, basically, you know for a fact of recursive self-modification, there's a very old idea that evolution evolves evolvability. But you know for a fact that basically the way evolution works, it reuses modules basically. If you evolve, a centipede has evolved the leg, it doesn't have to re-evolve the leg 100 times. Okay, centipedes don't have 100 legs, they have a funny number. But anyway, you have that basic building block and then you reuse that building block again and again. What it means is that the output from previous generations of evolution, the function has basically modified itself. So what the output from previous generations has become the unit of future iterations of the same function. So you create these kind of modules and we use them again and again. That's basically a recursive self-modification. And in the brain, the same idea of chunking. Alan New and Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winning Herbert Simon, they said that basically chunking, which is exactly what is happening in biology, is the key to understanding human intelligence. So see, but this is again, it's recursive self-modifying structure. So okay, so you see, I've gone from the abstract to the absolutely concrete. Now I'm going to basically relate everything I said to the earlier talks. because there's something even deeper than this. There's something about this theory. This distillation of the theory into this dynamic formal axiomatic system and most minimal distillation of universal grammar, the solution to the minimalist program, leads onto something even deeper. It's called the universal perfect language and the historical monad. So this is so deep, like you wouldn't believe. It's historical and it's part of the perennial wisdom. Okay. Now, let me tell you the properties of the universal and perfect language as people at Leibniz and Descartes understood it. So all those luminaries we saw earlier, basically, they existed in this context of the kind of thinking of Riemann Lowell, who was really the kind of like, he influenced people massively. So Descartes came up with analytical geometry and Leibniz came up with differential calculus, law of Newton, but they were really searching for the universal perfect language. Okay, so, let me show you the properties as they understood it. Okay. Now, it was simple. It could be learned in a week. I got it wrong. I read my notes again. And basically, it could be learned in a week. Okay, so it's simple. It could be learned in a week, something very cool, quite easy to learn, something quite abstract, but easy. Okay, it was geometric. So Leibniz admired Chinese characters and Egyptian hieroglyphics, but obviously Chinese characters are really clunky. Learn 6,000 characters and read a newspaper. But he admired the geometric quality. Somehow the characters somehow reflected the thing they were representing, which takes us to point 3. They had implicit meaning. They mean what they mean. There's no dictionary needed. This is all part of the universal perfect language. And also they were combinatorial. So basically the ars combinatorial, which Leibniz called Riemann Lowell's work, basically is about combinations. Again, this ability to combine kind of representational atoms to more complex things. And the most important part, it was generative. So this kind of like idea of the little arrows and the Lindemar systems, it generates propositions, it generates life forms, it generates trees, okay? And that all of it distilled to a monad, okay? So what we're saying is basically the properties of this distillation of this life intelligence theory has exactly the properties of this universal perfect language and this notion of a monad that then generates, the universal perfect language. Okay, so let's just finish off with the kind of implications of this work. Okay, one of the things, it leads to a new way of doing artificial intelligence, a new generation of neural networks based on how neurons actually work, a new generation of evolutionary algorithms that use all the transformations of evolution. It leads to really a kind of a new generation of artificial intelligence based on a true understanding of life and intelligence. Okay, and another implication is really for the perennial wisdom and the worldview. Now, everything in the first talk of the series, basically, this combines totally with that. The notion of microcosm as macrocosm, the notion that basically, okay, the universe emanates from a point, and then, gives rise to this idea of a cosmic Christ, universal Vishnu, a kind of celestial Buddha becomes a body. But obviously, you start from a point and you become a body. Okay, so this idea of microcosm as macrocosm obviously kind of feeds in very nicely with this idea of this idea of a life intelligence theory emanating from a point. But the really important part is basically it allows us to understand what life and intelligence actually is. Okay, so this is obviously a very deep question. What is the nature of life and intelligence? Okay, this is the answer. Okay, this is the answer. Now, there is an idea that basically mathematics and the universe, okay, elegant mathematics, beautiful mathematics will then find correspondence in the physical universe. So Einstein's relativity, the mathematics was all worked out by other people to do non-linear non-Euclidean geometry. And basically, this non-Euclidean geometry was all worked out. Einstein applied it to space and time, and perfect match. There's a very deep relationship between mathematics and the universe. Now, if there's something happening at the deepest level of mathematics, this recursively self-modifying trick, what does it correspond to? And the answer is it corresponds to life and intelligence. That shows that life and intelligence is something rooted so deeply in the actual very fabric of the deepest level of mathematics. Okay, that's a very obviously, it's a very bold assertion, but you see the reasoning behind it. There's something about when you see life and intelligence in this kind of reduced, most simple way, then it kind of gives you a new insight into the very nature of life and intelligence itself. It is fundamental. It is basically monad. It is basically, what generates the universe, and it's most fundamental. Now, what's the correspondence to the monad to us? And I'd say it's the one consciousness. Okay, that's something takes more explaining, but we'll do in due course in the future. But okay, so we covered a lot of ground. Anything I missed out? I mean, you get the picture. You want to basically introduce a worldview, a whole Weltanschauung for the 21st century, and that's going to go against the existing worldviews, fundamentalist Islam, fundamentalist Christianity, neoliberalism, all these kind of existing Marxist worldviews, all these entrenched worldviews on which power depends. So you're going to need something dramatic to make it happen. And I think the thing that needs to happen, that will make it happen, is firstly the creation of true AI that can really make this hard to ignore, really, this theory hard to ignore, and will fast track the acceptance of the theory. But the theory in turn really forms the basis for basically this reform of all knowledge, and basically gives the kind of impetus and I guess the weight behind a completely new 21st century worldview. That's actually the resurrection of the original worldview. And so it's really a consummation of a process that goes way back, not just to the Renaissance and Riemann Lowell. So essentially what we're saying is that basically these ideas really consummate what Riemann Lowell was after. But it goes way back to Pythagoras and Anaximander, because they were talking about the monad, and John Dee and all these people. Leibniz is a very recurring ancient idea and a mystery, and it goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. But anyway, so this, we think, is what's critical, really underpins a 21st century worldview that can really make it, can actually make it succeed against all the other competing worldviews and the existing entrenched worldviews in a relatively short space of time. So anybody got any questions? My God, I can't believe that's probably most material I've covered in the space of an hour ever. Yeah, that talk fast. I mean,
yeah, let's give a round of applause. I imagine that over some people's heads. I know a lot of it went over my head, and so that's going to require multiple viewings.
Yeah.
But I have a question or two about the entrenched worldviews. But anyone has any questions, put up, just pop in the chat, and we have about 20 minutes to field them. And
I was going to say, we mentioned Noam Chomsky a lot tonight, and basically I noticed that he's done a couple of talks in the past. I mean, if anyone knows Noam Chomsky, basically, just say, look, there's this crazy guy, he's got some interesting ideas. No, seriously, I think that basically I'm the guy Noam Chomsky has been waiting all his life to meet. I know it sounds arrogant and quite, but seriously, I wrote to Noam Chomsky, and he replied. We had a bit of exchange. I did a fatal mistake. I sent him a PDF of a 500-page book. You dummy! And I thought, he's not going to read a 500-page book from some guy he hardly knows. So anyway, I mean, this is more condensed. If anyone knows him, it'd be great to, I can meet him, because I know he's it'd be great to meet him. Yeah, it'd be amazing. Anyway, any questions?
Yeah, Chomsky came with the Stoa twice, and maybe a third appearance is way in Noam, going head to head.
Amazing, yeah. I mean, maybe a private meeting first, but I mean, like, that'd be amazing. Yeah, I mean, that'd be. I'm a massive admirer of Chomsky. I don't want to, I really admire the guy tremendously. I just think that basically what this is about is exactly what he's been asking after all these years, really, his universal grammar and the strong minimalist program. So yeah, man, that'd be something, wouldn't it?
So drop your question in the chat, and we'll take in Steph. You had a question. Oh, he doesn't want to be on YouTube. Okay. I can relate to the excitement of observing these patterns and allure of the theory of everything. However, X and Y share a pattern structure, X equal Y, right? You can read in the chat if that didn't make sense.
Structure is not equal to X, well, share pattern structure. However, X, Y share a pattern structure not equals Y, right? Well, I think the idea is symmetry. I mean, basically, you got to abstract things to a level of abstraction. That's why the binary tree stuff is so important. So what we're saying is, in terms of invariant aspect, there really is a kind of like invariant aspect that spans all aspects of life and intelligence, and that's really real actions going on. So basically, we saw the kind of symmetry of the little square boxes being rotated and stuff. So we're really talking about the symmetry of binary trees. So we're saying that this invariant aspect is something that decodes everything to do with life and intelligence in a single language. binary trees, and that in turn that allows us to develop this calculus. So I think it is a lot to digest, but I think the reasoning is very sound. Obviously, I mean, there was a lot to information to go to, but the real proof of the pudding really is basically that this theory finds its ultimate expression in terms of computer code. And there's an even deeper unification of not just of life science and brain science. There's actually an even deeper unification that is even more compelling of existing AI and machine learning, but also of various data compression technologies, but also even things like relational databases and how search engines work. So brain, kind of works like all these things, and the computer science captures facets, but a unified theory of life and intelligence also captures these aspects in computer science and artificial intelligence, machine learning. So I think there is some way to go in order to push this theory forwards. But I think it has a secret weapon. It has a kind of like the idea that basically this theory leads to the creation of something practical, far better artificial intelligence and machine learning. But I think there is a real, obviously, a battle ahead to get this idea accepted. But I think it will take years, not decades, or certainly not centuries.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, and then Luke. So Oliver, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, sorry, just got back. So yeah, I forgot my question. Do you know the mathematics of the monad? So if the monad is this sort of self-generating fundamental entity, then are you aware of the maths of the monad, and does what you think differ from what ontological mathematicians say?
So sorry, the mass of the monad is not like conventional mathematics, because I think it finds really its ultimate expression in terms of computer code. So like the mathematics of science, it gets compiled into, I mean, most science these days is numerical analysis. So it gets decomposed into discrete mathematics anyway, in terms of logic circuits and computers. What this monad is, basically, it is basically the description can be written on several sheets of paper, but really in terms of animating it, really it's really computer programs that really generate the kind of like I guess numerical integration of the theory. So I think like discrete mathematics, set theory is not normally used by working mathematicians, because if you write a proof in normal mathematics, it might take 10 pages. If you write it in set theory, it will take 100 pages. And if you write a mathematical proof in this language of a monad, it will take 1,000 pages. And mathematicians are not going to draw little stick diagrams, little right-angle stick diagrams, like thousands and thousands of pages of that. But this is what computers excel at. Okay, so the actual formal definition of the monad now is basically computer code, and it's basically kind of algorithmic. So I guess it's what it's saying anyway, that there is this kind of algorithmic science that really underlies kind of conventional science, and it's discrete and algorithmic. I mean, in terms of ontological mathematics, I'm not sure what you're saying. I mean, I think the first talk that that ontology, the universe is mathematics. There's a kind of like real neat kind of convergence between this idea of a mathematical monad that's the deepest level of mathematics, and how that would merge with the notion that the universe exists as a mathematical object. So that's my take on ontological mathematics, which might be different from other versions. Oliver, does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe I can just share with you at some point what I've seen, which kind of differs, I guess, but might reduce to some of these like more fundamental types of mathematics. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think one of the selling points is basically that in terms of fundamental mathematics, is really that discrete mathematics is bedrock, is really the deepest, most abstract level of mathematics. So in terms of the simplest, in terms of reducing it to a monad, basically, if the monad reduces formal axiomatic systems and is Chomsky's universal grammar, then one selling point is this is absolute bedrock. This is absolutely as simple as it possibly gets. So one of the reasons why people write in and say, what's happened with your fractal brain theory in the past 10 years? Because they mostly know me from videos that came out 10 years ago. It's really has been, the work has really been abstracting it into the simplest possible form. So the simplest possible form, it is really abstract, but really it finds its full expression really in terms of computer code. So in terms of expositions of the actual, the formal axiomatic system itself, it involves talking about all the various combinations of what you can do with binary trees. There's other dualities which I didn't talk about to do with dark and light, to do with sensing and doing and stuff. So there's other features of this kind of monad. So it's actually, there's a certain level of complexity to it, but it's got a complexity which you can write out in not too many sheets of paper actually. So it's quite distilled. So any other questions?
Thank you, Oliver. Luke, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah,
Luke.
great. Yeah, I really appreciated the talk, and I'm in a similar place as Peter. Some of it did go over my head, definitely. A lot to fit in. What I found it was interesting because I've studied yoga and also just ecology, and seeing the similarities and in those fields, like this is like a mathematical representation of a lot of the wisdom, and it's that's very interesting. And my question, well, I had one question. You had mentioned an author that you earlier on in the talk, and I had missed it, that you said you got a lot of inspiration from, or they had talked about.
Give me another clue. What context?
Yeah, there was. I know you mentioned quite a few. Maybe I could go back and look at the slide later on, but it's recorded. I can. Yeah. So my main question is, so I'm interested in designing ecologically conscious food production around watersheds, and it is incredibly complex, and I do see AI as a potential way to make that a more efficient and easier process in the computation of data. And this is like just really lighting up bulbs in my head, because it is I guess it's just proof that idea is one that is tangible. I'm wondering if you could, just speak on that.
Yeah. Luke, that's a really important point, because AI is such an important technology. Okay, on a kind of like people talk about this kind of super artificial intelligence and stuff, and if it's not controlled, it's going to be really dangerous. Okay. But on a very basic level, we have something of such great utility on a kind of like, on a kind of everyday level, just monitoring plants or monitoring traffic lights, monitoring. So basically, I gave several talks on AI this year. Check out my YouTube channel. One is about the startup at the end of time. So basically, this technology needs to find its way into the world. So I don't really have the resources to create super AI, but what I can do is create very useful AI that's very energy efficient. One of the things about existing AI, the backpropagation networks, they really burn a lot of electricity. They use GPUs. They really don't work so well. So what I think this theory leads to a super energy efficient form of AI. So I gave a talk in June. Check out my YouTube channel, and also in May about these ideas. And so what I think is basically there is a huge opening to do what you're doing as well. It's called Internet of Things. And it's not a super giant malevolent brain. It's one tiny little, that's going to take over the world, the stuff of nightmares. That's why, the last talk, you need basically AI to come with basically a fundamental reform of ethics and morality and politics to go with it. That's the last talk, okay? I mean, on a very simple level, we're basically talking about kind of little AIs that can monitor things, that are smart, who can work on very low power. So like having, like in a factory, is monitoring when machines break down. But in agriculture, it's basically constantly monitoring things. It's like having, with intelligence, everything becomes much better. And I think intelligence combined with the kind of like the oncoming wave of robotics, it's just going to, so I see a kind of like ecological, technological merger. this kind of ethical, political kind of new way of doing things includes it's not going to be ecological versus technological. It's going to be a complete merger of the two. I think things for like regenerative farming, organic farming, doing things more efficiently, doing things intelligently, then I think when intelligence can really pervade all these human systems of production and simple things like traffic control and things like that, then I think the savings are huge and immense. So I think on a very basic level, the first application of this technology will be actually quite small, simple AI working on mobile phones, working quite low power devices that do things like monitor farms, monitor, you know what I'm saying, production lines and stuff. So it's really the first application of this technology will be IoT, Internet of Things. So no, totally what you're doing is exactly where this AI will first emerge. And then later on, as we understand AI better and get those kind of safeguards in place, politically, morally, ethically, then we can start scale up to make more complex and more powerful AI.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really nice reframe. My time in school, there was a lot of the talk was centered around precision agriculture, and I tend to be more on the permaculture side and alternative agriculture. And so it's nice to see that it's just a merging of those fields and concepts, and the thought that it can actually encourage ethical action as opposed to more hyper extraction from a piece of land or whatever it is. But yeah, thank you for the talk.
Yeah, it's just a simple idea of like basically intelligence is really good when we know things, when we do things intelligently, then basically everything's augmented. We can actually manufacture intelligence that's actually controlled. It doesn't go wild. It's a hierarchy of control. It's like your hypothalamus controls all this amazing computing gear in your brain that's been evolved more recently. All this kind of stuff to do complex thoughts. But all these complex thoughts are yoked to your hypothalamus. So I think all this AI that we're going to create is going to be yoked to human beings, basically. And then in turn, this AI we create, we yoke to our hypothalamuses. And at the same gain of reproduction, life will continue basically, but our AIs will be in symbiosis with us, not taking over us, or basically us enslaving them, or vice versa, them enslaving us. It's a perfectly symbiosis relationship, and it's basically the same hypothalamic loop of survival and continuity that started from the beginning of time would then extend to the end of time as one continuum. You know what I'm saying? So I think the kind of creation of AI is just an evolutionary continuum of us, basically. I think that's my view on things. Okay, so it's the next question. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Luke. So we have a few questions, but people left and they don't want to be on YouTube, so I'm gonna select Peter, who just put a question in the chat. Peter, if you want to.
Hi, Wai. Can you hear me?
Hi, Peter. Hi.
Great. My question is, what do you make of the notion, the edge of chaos idea? I know it's come up like in different kind of complexity science that domains like cellular automata, but then also like I know there's the whole idea like with the logistic map and the period doubling route to chaos, like just a lot of these kind of mathematical simple kind of toy formalisms will have similar notions like that. And then I guess there's also just the notion of that just more vaguely, probably maybe as well.
Yeah. Right. I mean, years ago, I mean, basically in my 20s, basically any book which had the word complexity in it, I bought it and read it. Any book with chaos in it, I bought it and read it. And the edge of chaos idea, I think it does sound like something fundamental to the universe, that basically life exists on the edge of chaos. I think that's just the way, life is basically, I think it's something quite fundamental, like, the Mandelbrot set, all the exquisite patterns happening at the border of what's inside the Mandelbrot set and what's outside the Mandelbrot set. So I think it may well be a kind of cosmic fundamental of how the universe is structured. And that sounds a bit facetious, but I know my life is on the edge of chaos. Okay, that when things are comfortable in my life, that I got money in the bank and things are all fine and everything's stable, then basically I don't really do anything. Okay, my creativity just doesn't happen. And then when things are kind of desperate and things are kind of on the edge of chaos, then my head really comes alive. It's funny, that, isn't it? So maybe the same thing for life in general, but also maybe I do believe it may well be a cosmic thing, Peter. That's what I can say, really.
Great. Well, thanks. Good talk again.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I really like, these kind of tendrils, backward emanating, creating the universe. These kind of, the initial kind of like what we're bouncing back towards, the kind of like the time inverted antimatter is matter, matter is antimatter initial emanation that gave rise to the entire universe and our destinies, etc. I think it may well be that those tendrils are creating a fractal form, and that basically existence is basically where this forward phase is meeting those backward tendrils. And I think where it meets is exactly the edge of chaos. And basically what those backward tendrils has created is exactly like a fractal shape that we're heading back towards. And the intricacies of life, society, the kind of drama of, and tragedy, and the kind of comedy of life politics is basically exactly those tendrils, fractal edge of chaos tendrils manifesting in our lives. So yeah, totally. I believe it may well be something fundamental. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. So I'm going to read Lynn's, who had to step out. My question is whether this worldview then unlocks potential in a different way via unlocking new expressions in and of our genes. I'm thinking of Richard Rudd and his remarkable transmissions received regarding how there's an unfolding of intelligence and gifts and cities in our very genes that can make new possibilities we cannot see at lower expressions.
The idea that genes have a kind of incredible power that was totally unforeseen. I mean, obviously, the idea that earlier that that DNA doesn't just encode, the proteins and simple information. That DNA itself can do Boolean operations. That's astounding, isn't it? It can do logical or kind of like logical and etc. Do combinatorial logic. That's astounding. Whether it's the case that the actual genes contain the information may well be, maybe I'm wrong, may well be a kind of like trying to physically map the kind of akashic records or some information source to a physical thing. I think the everyone's God idea, or the idea that basically we are this physical body, but at the same time, we're also the totality of the universe. It doesn't necessarily need a kind of physical substrate for all this information to really pass through. So I don't think it's necessary to have a kind of physical substrate in which this kind of a higher level information needs to be encoded. And I think really when we understand that the person is simultaneously universe, then really the so-called akashic records doesn't exist in a physical substrate in our bodies. It really exists outside of our normal consciousness. And when we have that conscious experience of being God and being not this physical form, then we basically relinquish anything to do with our bodies, including our genes, to basically access total knowledge. And I guess that's where prophecy would come from, if you believe in that kind of stuff. Now, in terms of the potential of finding more knowledge or altering our genes in the future, I think it's a brave new world. The idea that once you understand your genes, understand these telomeres and life extension, all these things to do with genetics, then I think it's really like a brave new world to this transhumanist idea that once we fully understand how genes work and how the brain works, then we can really not just hack computer technology and computer programs. The idea that we can fundamentally alter ourselves with understanding, not through misunderstandings, a fundamental map to really kind of realize the aim of the original Renaissance magus magicians, and to combine it with the kind of aims of the transhumanists, where we're gaining kind of total power in the physical realm. Ideas like Yuval Noah Harari writes a lot about this, and transhumanists will go on about it, that we can actually physically alter ourselves to gain godlike powers, at the same time having like metaphysical transcendence as well. So I think we can combine the thoughts of the kind of original corpus hermeticum, becoming godlike, as in terms of kind of Adam returning to Eden, returning to heaven, becoming one with God, together with transhumanist ideas of kind of altering ourselves to become godlike in the physical realm as well.
So, yeah, I'll ask maybe a question to close us off today.
Yeah.
We'll set up next week. So, yeah, so this whole series is about the missing Weltanschauung, and the idea is this symmetry theory is going to help discover, rediscover, deep code that the perennial wisdom traditions were gesturing at. And I'm really curious about this, the entrenched worldviews that are currently in place and are competing amongst each other and perhaps blocking such a worldview, a missing Weltanschauung, to emerge. And so I'm curious what candidates, like of all the other worldviews that are currently at play in the noosphere, would interfere with this Weltanschauung to emerge. I'm thinking like scientism for some reason. That one seems like a big one. Like consumerism, like probably a combination. But I'm curious if you can speak on that.
I can tell you that every single one of the really major worldviews, I mean, there's an unraveling, there's like a reset switch. Once you understand what's behind them with the perennial wisdom, there's almost like there's a secret back passage once you understand the perennial wisdom and the history of these major worldviews. Okay, Scientology is quite major, but I have in mind worldviews like Islam and China, Marxism meets Confucianism meets Taoism. But obviously, the contemporary world of kind of sects and cults is also very important, and they will challenge this worldview. Now, say one example, it's very topical right now. I mean, everyone is on everyone's mind. Is Islam. You got to understand, once you get into the heart of Islam, that Islam has a reset switch, and it involves the perennial wisdom. That you got to understand, basically, the nature of Islam is this wada al-wujud, this oneness idea. You can actually use the quotes of Muhammad, and there's a kind of unraveling within Islam using the perennial wisdom, and you can do it using the quotes of Muhammad and the history of Islam, how things were banned, like in the 10th century, the idea of fana, annihilation of the self in God, was banned. Ideas like wada al-wujud, the oneness of all being, was essentially like we are God, one with God, was all changed. And even the idea of like critical reasoning, ijtihad, was suppressed and banned in the 10th century, which ijtihad means critical reasoning and independent thinking. I know modern day militant atheists will discredit Islam and say, it doesn't encourage this kind of thing. But once you see the history of Islam, basically, and understand the roots of Islam, there's a kind of unraveling within the heart of Islam. You can even go to the prophecies of Muhammad, when he actually says, basically, when the time comes, there will be a new Sharia, there will be a new reform, and the majority of Muslims will oppose this new reform initially. So do you see, even with this most impossible task of basically reforming Islam, which basically many Muslims want anyway, which militant atheists say is impossible, there is actually a built-in reset switch. There's a built-in reform switch. Once you know it, it unravels, and you can see it. You can just see what you need to do that. And what I've done is basically, okay, each of these is a subject of an entire talk totally. You can do the same for China. You can go back to Marxism and Hegel, again, this kind of esoteric core, Confucianism, Taoism, etc. And in America, neoliberalism, you go back to the roots of America. You have this kind of esoteric kind of founding, Pietism, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, apocalyptic Christianity, etc. So with every single major entrenched worldview that's tending towards nationalism and division and polarization, for what's happening in India as well, there's a kind of like a reset switch, a kind of like an unraveling. So even though it sounds like an impossible task to reform these really powerful blocks, Islam, Hinduism, India, China, America, there's a kind of common esoteric root. Once you understand it, and once you get in the position to do it, it basically unravels the existing worldviews, but it also brings together in a common denominator these existing reformed worldviews into a common worldview. I know it sounds outlandish, I know, but it's each of these is like a separate talk. It's like a separate 1 hour, 2 hour talk covering America, Islam, China, etc. But I think this, as the years go by, as months go by, then basically this is what you have to communicate, basically. And I think even though it sounds like an impossible task to challenge these entrenched worldviews, what I've seen and what I know in my head is basically it's totally doable. And it's almost as if the originators of religion, basically it's people who even made some of the suppressions and reforms of religion, have kind of put in this kind of reset switch. It's like the Death Star, like going back to myth now. Basically the Death Star was designed to be destroyed. So I think these existing worldviews that sound so powerful and completely entrenched and totally resistant to any kind of reform, what I think is basically the means of reform is actually built into them. That's what I believe. I could take some explaining, but I mean, really, I can see that. I can see it totally. It's so clear to me. But obviously, I need to unpack that in a series of talks. Maybe I'll come back and do that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like that. It's like getting inside a OODA loop of a worldview and then finding that reset switch and then clicking it off.
And the amazing thing, you're doing the reset switch in the frame of reference of each worldview. So you're not basically saying this is a new worldview. You're basically saying, look, this is what the original meaning of Islam. You're saying, look, this is the original meaning of America. This is the original meaning of China, etc. Original meaning of Marxism. Go back to Hegel. Go back to Renaissance. So that's the beauty of it. But I think so it's not such a challenge, because it's almost as if you're facing these opposed forces. But at the same time, there's almost like they're waiting to be reformed. If you can actually get the right message, get the right platform, get in the right place, you can basically, like the Death Star, you can basically, like Luke Skywalker, go down the trench, get a precise aimed missile. You can basically unravel all these systems and then basically unify them into a single cohesive whole. It doesn't mean Muslims become this new identity or Chinese become a new identity. It just means that you go back to the original meaning of China, Islam, India, and America, and it's the same meaning. That's what it is. Man, it's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really cool. When I think about like playing in the noosphere with these worldviews, that imagery of the Death Star, that scene comes to mind often as well. You just got to get that sweet spot.
Absolutely universal kind of motif in the myths. It is Odysseus firing his bow through the obstacles. It is the sword and the stone. It is basically all these like the task that needs to be accomplished. But I think if you can do it, then I know it sounds that sounds completely wild. All the problems in the world to do with worldviews, to do with the environment, to do with economics, to do with the ecosystem being destroyed. It's an interlocking problem, and the entire interlocking problems, all of that is like one big Death Star. So I think it's been set up to be solved, and that's a crazy belief, and it takes some unpacking, but I believe that's the way fate, the destiny wave function, has set things up. And when the time comes, which is now, you know, basically if you can actually get down that trench and fire at your little projectile just in the right place, I think the entire nexus of world problems solves into something far better. Yeah, I really believe that. Yeah.
Well, let the games begin. Session 3 is coming to an end, and session 4, I think it's about the spirituality, spiritual experience, and why does it happen? Would you like to set that up for us, Wei?
Oh man, yeah. This is really kind of ideas that really kind of like I've not presented before. It's basically explain all these kind of traditional paths which people have said lead to states of non-duality, becoming one with God, paths of expansion, paths of contraction. Like paths of contraction would be going off to the desert and, or, you know, kind of like 40 days, 40 nights. Paths of expansion is Tantra, it is Kabbalah, is what the Corpus Hermeticum talks about. But also unify that with essentially how all these different psychedelic drugs, which show how it's actually a path of contraction, how these, the main psychedelic drugs with a real history used in the ancient mysteries and in world religion, even though they affect different pathways, acetylcholine, gamma-aminobutyric acid, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, there's actually a common site of action. There's a common mode of action that ties in exactly with all the mystics and all the kind of great kind of like you know, spiritual geniuses have said has been a reason why these paths of contraction and expansion work. So I presented a kind of unified worldview, unified view of the brain, and in genomics. This is really a way of looking at all these different paths in a way that's really comprehensible. So once you explain to people basically that there is a state of non-duality, then basically then you have to show people a rationale for why it happens, to give people a roadmap. So I'm not going to explain any new path. I'm just going to justify the existing paths with a good track record, and that's part of intrinsic, part of existing world religion and these kind of mystical practices that already exist. Okay, that's what's going. The next talk's going to be another massive, ambitious talk. Okay, so do tune in.
Awesome. Yeah. So same link if you want to RSVP for the last session of this epic Philosopher-in-Residence series, and if you're watching on YouTube and you want to come live, it's fun engaging with Wei and then the chats, so feel free to visit us. And yeah, so that being said, Wei, everyone, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely enjoyed it, as always. Fantastic.